Sometimes a game is more than a way to pass the time. It can become a quiet test of patience, judgment, and trust. Long before poker had a name, people gathered around tables in places where money, reputation, and silence shaped every decision. The rules were often unwritten. What mattered was how a person held themselves when the outcome was uncertain. This is the history of poker. It stretches across centuries and continents, from courts and taverns to riverboats and quiet rooms behind closed doors. The game's path moves through moments of secrecy, risk, and waiting. Each place and era leaves its mark, but one thing remains steady. Poker is shaped by the pressure of not knowing what comes next. Players learn to wait, to read small signals, and to accept that every choice carries weight, even when the facts are incomplete. As we move through this history, the pace will stay gentle. There is no need to hurry. The sound and rhythm around you will remain calm and steady, with no sudden changes. Here, time can slow. There is space to settle in and turn down the world outside. In the quiet centuries before poker acquired its name, the world of card games stretched across the lands of Europe and Persia, each region nurturing its own traditions and mechanics. In this era, the rules of play were shaped by the subtle interplay of chance, skill, and human judgment. The games of these centuries did not yet carry the familiar terminology or structure known today, but within their patterns lay the seeds of what would become a game of remarkable complexity and enduring appeal. One of the earliest glimpses into the mechanics of wagering and hidden hands appears in the Persian game of Kanjafa. Around 1399, records describe an emir who won 2,000 drachmas, a sum that marked not only the presence of high stakes, but also the seriousness with which participants approached the game. The act of wagering, where fortunes could shift with the play of a hand, set the tone for the decision-making that would characterize card games in the centuries to come. In Mamluk Egypt, Al-Malik al-Muayyad was recorded as winning a substantial sum in Kanjafa between 1399 and 1417, further illustrating the prominence of gambling and the tangible rewards or losses at stake. As the centuries progressed, the game of Ganjafa emerged as a central pastime in Persia, particularly during the early Safavid period, under Shah Ismail, from 1501 to 1524. Ganjafa was distinct for its deck of 96 cards, divided into 8 suits of 12 cards each. This structure was notably different from the European decks, which typically contained 4 suits. The diversity of suits and cards in Ganjafa provided a broad canvas for strategy and chance, with each player holding a portion of the information and the rest concealed within the hands of their opponents or the deck itself. The mechanics of hidden information became more refined in games such as As, played during the Qajar period. In this game, 5 series of 5 identical cards were dealt to each player, creating a scenario where each participant held a private hand. The process began with the dealer placing a stake. The first player, after examining their cards, had to decide whether to cover the stake or raise it. This choice was made without full knowledge of the other player's hands, introducing a layer of uncertainty that called for careful judgment. The betting continued sequentially, with each player making decisions in turn, raising or covering until all stakes were equalized. Only after these decisions were complete were the cards revealed, and the best hand determined the winner. The element of deception, or at least the management of incomplete information, figured prominently in these early games. While explicit references to bluffing are not always present in surviving records, the structure of games like As required players to act on their private knowledge, while anticipating the possible strength of their opponent's hands. The sequential nature of betting, where each action could be observed and interpreted by others, allowed for subtle psychological play. Players could choose to raise with strong hands, or sometimes with weaker ones, hoping to influence the decisions of those yet to act. Transmission of these games across regions and generations occurred through both formal and informal channels. European travelers such as Tavernier documented the differences between Persian Ganjafa cards and their European counterparts, noting in the 17th century that Ganjafa used 8 kinds of cards, in contrast to the 4 suits familiar in Europe. Literary references in Persian texts and European travel books alike recorded the presence of these games in royal courts and among the upper echelons of society, suggesting that their rules and customs were taught and perpetuated within elite circles. At the same time, the spread of playing cards into European cities such as Barcelona, where inventories listed Joc de Naipes Morxics in 1414, indicates that card games also permeated urban and multicultural environments, crossing boundaries between Muslim, Christian, and Jewish communities. The documentation of these games and their rules was sometimes the work of scholars, travelers, or chroniclers, who observed play in courts and public spaces. In Mamluk Egypt, the historian Ibn Tagri Berdi recorded instances of high-stakes gambling in Kanjafar during 1417. In Persia, the reigns of Shah Esmail, Shah Tahmasp, and Shah Abbas I saw references to Ganjafar in literature and travel accounts, preserving details of the card's appearance and the social context of play. Occasionally, direct quotations or descriptions from participants or observers survive, offering glimpses into the experience of play and the perceptions of those involved. Yet, much of the understanding of the atmosphere and mechanics must be pieced together from these scattered records and the structures of the games themselves. By the end of this early period, the foundational mechanics of hidden information and wagering had become established features of card games in both Europe and Persia. Players received private hands, made decisions without certainty, and wagered on the strength of their cards and their judgment of opponents' intentions. The structure of play, with its alternation of concealment and revelation, laid the groundwork for the psychological and strategic dimensions that would later define more modern games. The social settings in which these games flourished were as varied as the rules themselves. In Persia, the courts of the Safavid Shahs provided a luxurious backdrop for Ganjafar. Literary references and travel accounts place the game firmly within the elite circles of Shah Esmail, Shah Tahmasp, and Shah Abbas I. The presence of card games in these courts signaled not only leisure, but also the subtle negotiation of status and favor. Participation in such games could be a marker of inclusion within the highest ranks of society, while success or failure at the table could influence one's reputation. Yet, card play was not confined to palaces and royal gatherings. In early 15th century Bologna, gambling with cards became prevalent enough to draw the attention of religious authorities. In 1423, Saint Bernardino preached against the game known as Chartisel su Naibus, urging players to burn their cards in a public demonstration of piety. This intervention highlights the moral concerns that sometimes accompanied the spread of card games, as well as the visibility of such games in urban public life. The fact that players responded by burning their cards suggests both the popularity of the games and the influence of religious figures in shaping public behavior. The inventories of Barcelona, in 1414, record the presence of playing cards as Joc de Naipes Morxics, indicating their integration into the daily life of a city known for its diversity. Muslim, Christian, and Jewish communities coexisted in Barcelona, and the appearance of playing cards in household inventories suggests that the games crossed social and cultural boundaries. Card play thus became a common thread, linking different strata of society, from the courts of Persia to the urban households of Spain. Within these varied settings, distinctions of class and profession often influenced who played and how. In the courts, nobles and courtiers engaged in games that could affect their standing, while in cities and towns, merchants, artisans and laborers found their own forms of amusement and risk. The stakes of play could range from modest sums to fortunes, as seen in the high-stakes gambling recorded in Mamluk Egypt. The presence of large wagers, or the loss of significant amounts, underscored the risks inherent in the games and the potential for both gain and loss. Rules of conduct, whether formal or informal, governed behavior at the card table. In some settings, codes of etiquette dictated who could play, how stakes were set, and what actions were considered honorable or deceitful. In others, the absence of strict regulation allowed for greater flexibility, but also greater risk of dispute. The intervention of figures such as Saint Bernardino or Shah Abbas II, who prohibited all kinds of games, including cards between 1642 and 1666, reflected ongoing debates about the propriety and consequences of gambling. Hierarchy and reputation played visible roles in the dynamics of play. In the courts, success at cards could enhance one's standing, while repeated losses or accusations of cheating could tarnish a reputation. In public venues, the willingness to wager or the ability to read opponents became markers of skill and social acumen. The atmosphere of the games varied with the setting, sometimes convivial and celebratory, at other times tense with the prospect of loss or censure. Contemporary accounts, where they survive, describe both the excitement and the dangers of play, as well as the social consequences that could follow a dramatic win or loss. By the close of this period, the environments in which card games were played were clearly shaped by considerations of hierarchy, risk, and social standing. Whether in the courts of Persia, the taverns and public spaces of European cities, or the diverse households of Barcelona, cards served as both a pastime and a test of character. Beyond the mechanics and the settings, the practice of these games fostered a particular kind of decision-making behavior. The structure of games like As required players to act under conditions of uncertainty, with only their own 5 cards visible and the intentions of others concealed. Each round of betting demanded restraint and patience. A player could choose to cover the dealer's stake after studying their hand, using the phrase didam to signal readiness. This act was not merely a matter of matching the bet. It was a judgment about the strength of one's cards and the likelihood of success. The sequential nature of betting in As meant that each player's decision was informed not only by their own cards, but also by the actions of those who had acted before them. Observation became a key skill. A player who watched carefully might discern patterns in opponents' raises or hesitations, using these clues to guide their own choices. Patience was often rewarded, as rash actions could lead to unnecessary losses, while careful management of stakes and attention to the flow of play increased the chances of victory. The determination of the best hand at the end of the betting sequence reinforced the importance of both skill and restraint. Players who managed their bets wisely, who chose when to raise and when to fold, stood to gain both money and honor. The risk of loss was ever present, and records describe instances where fortunes shifted as a result of a single hand. The experience of uncertainty, of acting without complete knowledge, was a constant companion at the card table, shaping the behavior and strategies of those who played. Advice and strategies, where they survive in the historical record, often emphasize the importance of reading opponents and managing risk. While explicit treatises on card strategy from this period are rare, the actions of players and the outcomes of games reveal a growing awareness of the psychological dimensions of play. The ability to observe, to wait, and to act decisively in moments of uncertainty became hallmarks of skilled players. Reputation was built not only on luck, but on the consistent demonstration of these qualities. The cultivation of decision-making skills under uncertainty, as seen in the play of As and similar games, laid the groundwork for the evolution of more complex forms of card play. The habits of restraint, patience, and observation, developed in response to the demands of early wagering games, became enduring features of the card player's art. These qualities, tested and refined in the courts of Persia and the cities of Europe, would continue to shape the experience of card games for generations to come. As the 18th century drew to a close, the mechanics, social environments, and decision-making practices of early European and Persian card games stood fully formed. The interplay of hidden information and wagering, the influence of hierarchy and risk, and the cultivation of careful judgment under uncertainty, all combined to create a rich and enduring tradition. In these games, before poker had a name, the essential elements of strategic play and psychological insight were already in place, waiting for the next chapter in the story of cards. In the early years of the 19th century, the first written traces of poker began to appear in the United States. New Orleans, a city shaped by its French colonial past and vibrant port activity, offered the earliest known documentation of the game. In 1829, the English actor Joseph Cowell provided a direct account of poker being played in New Orleans. He described a game involving 4 players, each dealt from a deck containing only 20 cards. These players wagered on the value of their hands, a practice that marked the game as distinct from earlier European gambling amusements. Cowell's observation is the earliest recorded mention of poker in the United States, anchoring the game's emergence in a specific place and time. His account is not merely anecdotal, it details the mechanics of the game as it was played, emphasizing both the reduced deck and the competitive betting that defined the experience. Poker's documented appearance in New Orleans does not stand alone. The name and some of the basic concepts of the game drew directly from poker, a French card game brought to Louisiana by early colonists. Yet these American games diverged from their European ancestors in their structure and in the central role of betting. Where poker and similar games might have involved limited or ritualized wagering, the American variant, as Cowell described, placed value and risk at the heart of play. The deck was truncated to 20 cards, a format likely chosen for the practical reason of accommodating 4 players, and the game's objective was clearly defined: to outmaneuver others, not just by the luck of the draw, but by the calculated placement of bets. Contemporary records from this period, while scarce, do not provide detailed written rules or a standardized terminology for poker. Instead, they point to a game in transition, one that was developing its own identity within the unique circumstances of the United States. The available descriptions distinguish poker from earlier Persian or European card games by emphasizing the betting structure and the competitive social nature of the play. Joseph Cowell's account, for instance, does not attribute the game to any single inventor or institution, nor does it mention formal regulation or oversight. Instead, poker is presented as a pastime encountered among the diverse social gatherings of New Orleans. No other named individuals from this period are directly associated with the earliest documentation of poker in the United States. The game's spread and evolution are evidenced in later accounts, such as Jonathan Green's book, An Exposure of the Arts and Miseries of Gambling, which references a game of 20-card poker played on a Mississippi steamboat in 18. Although Green's observation falls outside the strict boundaries of this early period, it reinforces the presence of poker in the region and the mode of play described by Cowell. During the years between 1800 and 1829, there are no surviving contemporaneous quotations that capture the novelty of poker or the public perception of the game. Instead, the existing records establish that, by 1829, poker had emerged as a distinct and recognized form of gambling in New Orleans, setting it apart from the European games that preceded it. New Orleans, during these decades, was a city defined by movement. The Louisiana Purchase of 1803 brought the city under United States control, transforming it into a hub for commerce and migration. French colonists had already established their customs and games, but the influx of traders, migrants, and travelers from across the continent and the world changed the social landscape. The city's port bustled with activity. Ships arrived daily, carrying goods and people from distant places. The streets echoed with a mixture of languages and the clatter of trade. In this environment, the boundaries of society were permeable, and the opportunities for both gain and loss were ever present. The economic character of New Orleans in the early 19th century reflected its status as a crossroads. The flow of goods brought wealth and instability in equal measure. Merchants, laborers, sailors, and adventurers all passed through the city, seeking fortune or simply a new beginning. This transient population shaped the city's social rhythm. Many arrived with little and departed with even less, while others found quick success through trade or speculation. The uncertainty of daily life fostered a climate in which games of chance and skill could thrive. Poker, with its balance of luck and judgment, appealed to those accustomed to risk and reward. Gambling saloons lined the streets of New Orleans, offering a range of games to the city's diverse residents and visitors. These establishments were the primary venues where poker took root. Inside, the air was thick with tobacco smoke and the murmur of conversation. Tables were crowded with men staking their futures on the turn of a card. The absence of formal regulation meant that games varied from one saloon to the next, but the structure of poker, with its familiar betting and hand rankings, provided a common thread. For many, these saloons were more than just places of entertainment. They were arenas where reputation and fortune could be won or lost in a single evening. Beyond the brick and mortar of the city, the Mississippi River offered another stage for poker's growth. By 1811, steamers began to ply the river, carrying travelers and cargo between distant ports. On these boats, the saloon atmosphere was recreated in floating form. Poker games unfolded in cramped cabins and lounges, attracting gamblers, traders, and those seeking distraction from the monotony of travel. The transient nature of the population on these steamers mirrored that of New Orleans itself, and the risks of gambling were compounded by the uncertainty of the river journey. The environment of New Orleans during this period was one of opportunity and danger. The prospect of sudden wealth drew many to the gaming tables, but the risks were equally great. Contemporary accounts describe the atmosphere of these gambling establishments as charged and unpredictable. Fortunes changed hands quickly, and disputes were settled without recourse to written law or external authority. The same qualities that made New Orleans a magnet for trade and migration also made it a fertile ground for poker's early development. The city's openness to new ideas and its tolerance for risk created conditions in which the game could flourish. The structure of early American poker reflected the informal and adaptable spirit of its surroundings. The standard format of the game, as described in 1829, involved a deck of 20 cards. This limited deck included only the aces, kings, queens, jacks, and tens of each suit. With 4 players at the table, each received 5 cards, and the remaining cards were set aside. The truncated deck reduced the number of possible hand combinations, making the game more manageable and faster paced. It also heightened the importance of each card dealt, increasing the tension and drama of every round. No single set of written rules governed poker during this period. Instead, the game was played according to informal understandings that varied by location and circumstance. Players negotiated the terms of each round, agreeing on stakes, betting procedures, and methods for resolving disputes. This lack of standardization meant that poker was a game of both skill and social navigation. A player's success depended not only on the cards in hand, but also on the ability to read opponents and adapt to the shifting expectations of the table. The defining features of early poker placed a premium on judgment. Betting and bluffing were central to the game, and each player was called upon to weigh incomplete information against the behavior of others. In the absence of formal rules, experience and intuition became valuable assets. Players learned to assess the strength of their own hands and to interpret the betting patterns of their opponents. The possibility of bluffing introduced an additional layer of complexity. A well-timed bet could induce an opponent to fold a superior hand, while overconfidence could lead to ruin. Contemporary observers noted that success in poker required more than luck. The distribution of cards introduced an element of chance, but the structure of the game rewarded those who could make sound decisions under pressure. The informal nature of the rules encouraged negotiation and improvisation. Disputes were settled by consensus or by the persuasive power of those at the table. In this environment, the ability to judge character and intention was as important as the ability to calculate odds. No named individuals from this early period are recorded as commentators on the balance of skill and chance in poker. The accounts that have survived focus on the mechanics of the game and the circumstances of play, rather than on explicit analysis of strategy or expertise. Yet the very structure of early poker, with its emphasis on betting and bluffing, made it a test of judgment. The players who excelled were those who could navigate uncertainty, interpret the actions of others, and act decisively in the face of risk. By the end of the 1820s, poker had established itself as a distinct and recognizable game in the United States. Its roots in the French game of poc were still visible, but the American version had developed its own character. The limited deck, informal rules, and focus on judgment set it apart from the games played in Europe or Persia. In the gambling saloons and on the riverboats of New Orleans, poker became a fixture of social life, a game that reflected the aspirations and anxieties of a city in flux. The emergence of poker in the United States was shaped by the unique conditions of New Orleans. The city's role as a port, its diverse and transient population, and its culture of risk and opportunity provided fertile ground for the game's development. The early structure of poker, with its reliance on judgment and adaptability, mirrored the uncertainties of life in the city. As a new century unfolded, poker found its place at the intersection of chance and skill, offering players a challenge that was as much about understanding others as it was about the turn of a card. In these years, the game laid the foundation for the enduring appeal and complexity that would define it in the decades to come. Beneath the wide, slow-moving skies of the Mississippi Valley, riverboats became the great arteries of American movement and commerce between 1830 and 1860. The river itself wound through a landscape in flux, carrying not only cotton and timber, but also the ambitions and fortunes of countless travelers. On these floating palaces, poker found fertile ground, establishing itself as both a pastime and a means of managing risk for men far from home. The decks buzzed with conversation, the shuffle of cards, and the clatter of chips, as steamboats connected cities like St. Louis, Natchez, Vicksburg, and New Orleans. Each stop brought a new influx of passengers, merchants, laborers, fortune seekers, each with stories, hopes, and often a wallet flush with cash from recent dealings. The riverboats were more than conveyances. They were microcosms of the nation's restless energy, and poker was at the heart of their social life. The first printed reference to poker appeared in 1837, when James Hildreth described it as a favorite game of cards at the South and West. His observation matched the reality on the river. Poker was no longer confined to private parlors or isolated settlements. Instead, it thrived in the public spaces of steamboat cabins, where strangers gathered around green boughs tables, testing their luck and their wits. Sol Smith, in his Recollections of Theatrical Management, remembered a poker game played on a Mississippi riverboat in 1835-20, one of many such encounters that filled the hours between ports. Jonathan Green, too, recounted a game of 20-card poker on a steamboat, bound for New Orleans in February 1833, noting its popularity among the passengers. These accounts, written years after the fact, capture the atmosphere of anticipation and possibility that pervaded the riverboats. Every hand dealt was a new beginning, every journey a fresh chance. By the 1830s, at least 1,500 gamblers worked the Mississippi River, moving from boat to boat, town to town, following the flow of commerce. Some, like George Devol, began their careers as cabin boys, and soon became fixtures in the world of riverboat gambling. Devoler, who started work on the river in 1839, later wrote of the heyday of riverboat poker, when 5 games might run simultaneously in a single cabin, each surrounded by hopeful players and sharp-eyed professionals. The riverboats themselves were run by companies eager to attract business, but records of specific organizations hosting poker games are sparse. Instead, the games often sprang up wherever space allowed, on the main deck, in private cabins, or in makeshift lounges set up for the journey's duration. Regulation of gambling on riverboats during this period was minimal. The river was a space apart, slipping through multiple jurisdictions, and often beyond the reach of local law. Oversight, where it existed, was informal and inconsistent. The absence of strict rules allowed poker to flourish, but it also demanded a certain self-reliance from players. Each game was its own small world, governed by the customs of those at the table and the watchful eyes of professional gamblers. The riverboats became places where fortunes could change in a single hand, and where the movement of money mirrored the restless energy of the nation itself. The types of people drawn to riverboat poker were as varied as the river's currents. Men seeking opportunity, merchants traveling for business, and professional gamblers all found themselves at the same tables. New players joined at every stop, bringing unfamiliar faces and fresh stories to the mix. The games were not limited to any single group. Instead, they reflected the diversity and mobility of the American frontier. In this environment, poker adapted to the needs and rhythms of a world in perpetual motion. As the riverboats moved from city to city, they carried poker with them, spreading the game northwards along the Mississippi and westwards with the advancing frontier. The transient nature of riverboat life shaped not just who played, but how the game was played. In established communities, reputation and long-standing relationships often governed behavior at the table. On the river, by contrast, the constant flow of newcomers meant that long-term reputation mattered less. Trust and suspicion were built in the moment, based on observed behavior and decision-making rather than past history. This shift was reflected in the evolution of the game itself. In the 1830s, poker adopted its anglicized name and began to be played with a full 52-card deck, rather than the original 20 cards. The larger deck allowed more players to join, accommodating the crowded cabins and the ever-changing roster of participants. The flush, a hand combination now familiar to all players, became recognized during this period, adding complexity and depth to the game. These changes were not the product of any single individual or organization, but rather the result of countless hands played in countless games, each shaped by the needs of a transient, mobile community. The enforcement of poker rules and norms on riverboats was shaped by necessity. With so many strangers gathering around the table, formal mechanisms for resolving disputes were rare. Instead, players relied on immediate observation, watching for signs of cheating, gauging the temperament of their opponents, and responding to the ebb and flow of the game. Marked decks were not uncommon, as George Devol later recalled, and players had to remain vigilant. Devil himself once posed as a horse trader and won $4,300 using marked cards before his boat reached New Orleans. In this world, trust was provisional, extended only as far as the next hand. John Habermel described gambling on Western rivers as a general custom as late as 1855, emphasizing the ubiquity of the practice. Frederick Law Olmsted, traveling through Louisiana, observed gambling taking place constantly on a steamboat, day and night, with scarcely a 15-minute interruption over 3 days. These observations capture the relentless pace and high stakes of riverboat life. With new faces joining at every stop and little time for relationships to develop, poker became a test of nerve and perception. Players judged one another by their actions at the table, not by reputation or recommendation. Newcomers and strangers were integrated into games with little ceremony. The open nature of riverboat society meant that anyone with the price of a steak could sit down and try their luck. Etiquette was shaped by the immediate needs of the game and the personalities of those present. Some, like Devil, used guile and deception. Others relied on caution and observation. The rules of the table emerged from the interplay of these forces, shaped by the demands of a constantly shifting population. In this environment, the importance of immediate behavior and decision-making at the table increased dramatically. Players who could read a room, adapt to new opponents, and manage risk in the moment thrived. Those who relied on reputation or past favors found themselves at a disadvantage. The riverboat, with its constant churn of passengers and absence of fixed community, became a crucible for a new style of play, one that valued adaptability, observation, and quick thinking above all else. As poker spread along the Mississippi and into the frontier, it took on a new social function. The game provided a structured alternative to the violence that often accompanied disputes over money or honor in mobile, temporary communities. The element of betting, which distinguished poker from other card games, introduced a framework for managing risk and resolving disagreements. Instead of resorting to threats or physical confrontation, players could stake their claims on the turn of a card. Draw poker, which emerged in the late 1840s, added further structure to the game. With one round of betting before the draw and another after, the new variant required greater skill and offered more opportunities for negotiation and resolution. By 1850, play with a full 52-card deck had largely replaced the original 20-card version, reflecting the changing needs of the riverboat environment. The new rules emphasized strategy and decision-making, giving players more control over their fate and reducing the likelihood of disputes escalating into violence. Accounts from the period suggest that the outcomes of poker games were generally accepted as final, enforced by the consensus of those at the table. While cheating and deception were not unknown, the risk of being caught and excluded from future games acted as a deterrent. Abraham Oakey Hall, writing in 1851, described how gamblers on riverboats exercised caution and diplomacy to avoid conflict. Professional gamblers like J.J. Bryant operated on the lower Mississippi, relying on skill and reputation within the closed world of the riverboats to maintain order and resolve disagreements. Poker's role as a means of dispute resolution was not always formalized, but it was widely recognized. The structure of the game, with its clear rules and visible stakes, offered a way to settle arguments without recourse to violence. In an environment where law enforcement was distant and unreliable, this was no small achievement. The riverboat poker table became a place where differences could be addressed, risks could be managed, and fortunes could be won or lost according to the logic of the game. For many, the experience of playing poker on the river was as much about social negotiation as it was about cards and money. The game provided a space where diverse individuals, strangers brought together by circumstance, could interact on equal terms. Each hand dealt was an opportunity to test one's judgment, to measure oneself against others, and to find resolution without conflict. In this way, poker contributed to the development of a new kind of social order, one suited to the demands of a mobile, rapidly changing society. As the riverboats continued their journeys up and down the Mississippi, poker remained a constant presence. The game adapted to the needs of its players, providing not only entertainment, but also a framework for managing risk and resolving disputes. The movement of people, goods, and money along the river shaped the evolution of poker, transforming it from a simple pastime into a vital part of life on the American frontier. In the cabins and salons of the great steamboats, beneath the ever-changing sky, poker became more than a game. It became a way of navigating the uncertainties of a world in motion. In the years following the Civil War, poker underwent a transformation that would shape its character for generations. The world in which the game was played had changed. The close of the conflict left the country with a restless energy, and as communities rebuilt and expanded, so too did the appetite for games of chance. Within this environment, poker's rules and structure began to settle into more familiar forms. The decades after 1865 saw the gradual adoption of a full 52-card deck as the standard for play. While the transition began as early as the 1830s, it was through the years that followed the war that the 52-card deck became the norm across the expanding landscape of American poker. This change, subtle in appearance, had profound consequences for the game's complexity and strategic possibilities. The introduction of the full deck did not happen overnight, nor did it spread evenly across all regions. Early games, especially those played before mid-century, often relied on a stripped deck, sometimes omitting cards below the tens. But as the game's popularity spread, players and organizers alike saw the advantages of a broader range of cards. The 52-card deck allowed for a wider variety of hands and combinations. It opened the door to more nuanced forms of betting and bluffing. The expanded deck increased the likelihood of rare hands, such as the flush or full house, and added a new dimension to the calculation of odds at the table. The draw mechanic, present before 1850, also gained traction during this period. It allowed players to discard some or all of their cards and receive new ones, introducing a fresh element of suspense and skill. Draw poker, as it became known, required players not only to evaluate the strength of their starting hand, but also to anticipate the potential improvements that a draw could produce. This mechanic rewarded observation, memory, and psychological insight, qualities that would come to define the most successful players. The draw further deepened the game's strategic layers, as players weighed the risks and rewards of discarding cards, and tried to interpret the actions of their opponents. By the mid-1860s, hand rankings were being recorded in published handbooks. The 1864 edition of a poker handbook listed the order of hands as 1 pair, 2 pairs, straight sequence or rotation, triplets, flush, full house, and fours. Notably, the straight ranked below the flush at this time, a decision that did not align with the mathematical rarity of each hand, but reflected the conventions of the day. The relative value of hands was a subject of debate and occasional controversy. In 1892, John Keller publicly defended the straight hand, signaling the ongoing discussion among players and writers about the proper order of rankings. Other innovations emerged as well. The concept of jackpots required that a player hold at least a pair of jacks or better in order to open the betting. This rule helped to regulate the pace of the game, ensuring that only hands of a certain strength could initiate action. It also added a layer of anticipation, as players waited for a qualifying hand before the first round of betting could begin. Jackpots encouraged more cautious and deliberate play in the opening rounds, shaping the flow of the game in subtle ways. Stud poker, another variant, developed during the American Civil War and grew in popularity in the years that followed. Unlike draw poker, stud required players to work with the cards they were dealt, with a mix of face-up and face-down cards creating opportunities for both open and hidden information. This format demanded a different strategic approach, emphasizing the ability to read visible cards and deduce the likely holdings of opponents. The formalization of rules was not the work of a single person or organization. Instead, it was a process shaped by the contributions of writers, publishers, and players. Henry George Bone was among the first to publish the rules of poker in print in 1850, providing an early reference point for the game's structure. As the years passed, other handbooks and guides appeared, each contributing to the ongoing conversation about how poker should be played. These efforts reflected a broader desire for consistency and fairness in the game, especially as it spread into new regions and attracted a more diverse audience. Regional variations persisted throughout the late 19th century, but the trend was toward reconciliation and standardization. As players traveled, they encountered different customs and house rules. Disputes over hand rankings, betting procedures, and the use of wildcards were not uncommon. Yet as the game matured, there was a gradual movement toward common standards. The growing body of published rules helped to bridge the differences, providing a reference for resolving disagreements and fostering a shared understanding of the game's structure. The impact of these changes on gameplay and player strategy was significant. With a standardized deck and clearly defined hand rankings, players could more accurately assess their odds and plan their bets. The draw mechanic and the introduction of stud poker expanded the range of viable strategies, rewarding both caution and boldness, calculation and intuition. The result was a game that demanded not only luck, but also skill, patience, and psychological insight. Poker became a contest of wits as much as of chance, and its reputation as a game of skill began to take hold. As the rules of poker took on a more settled form, the venues in which the game was played also changed. In the years after the Civil War, the American frontier continued its westward push, and with it came the spread of poker into new territories. Saloons became the primary stage for the game's evolution. These establishments, often raucous and bustling, offered a space where men from varied backgrounds could gather, test their luck, and measure their skill. The atmosphere of the saloon was shaped by the rhythms of frontier life, often noisy, sometimes tense, but always charged with the possibility of fortune or defeat. Poker did not remain confined to the rough-and-tumble world of the saloon. As the century progressed, the game found its way into more settled venues. Urban gambling halls began to appear in the late 19th century, offering a more refined and orderly setting for play. These halls, especially prominent in cities like San Francisco, provided tables, dealers, and a measure of oversight that was often lacking in the earlier, more improvised settings. The Barbary Coast district of San Francisco gained particular renown for its association with poker, drawing players from across the region to its lively tables. Mining camps, too, became important centers of poker activity. The late 19th century saw waves of prospectors and fortune seekers flocking to new discoveries, and wherever they gathered, poker followed. In these makeshift communities, the game offered both a diversion from the hardships of daily life and a chance to win or lose a small fortune. The social fabric of the mining camp was often woven around the poker table, where strangers could become friends or rivals in the span of a single night. Private homes also played a role in the spread of poker. By the late 19th century, it was not uncommon for families and friends to gather for games in the comfort of their own parlors. These home games tended to be more restrained than their counterparts in the saloon or gambling hall, but they shared the same basic structure and sense of excitement. The presence of poker in private rooms reflected its growing acceptance as a part of everyday social life. The types of games played varied depending on the setting. In both saloons and early gambling halls, 5-card draw and 5-card stud were the dominant forms. These variants offered a blend of simplicity and depth, making them accessible to newcomers while providing ample opportunity for skillful play. The rules could be explained in a few minutes, but mastery required hours of practice and careful observation. The social status and background of players in these venues were as varied as the places themselves. In the saloon, miners, cowboys, merchants, and travelers might all find themselves seated at the same table. Urban gambling halls attracted businessmen, professionals, and those with a taste for risk. Home games brought together families, neighbors, and friends, blurring the lines between gambling and recreation. The game's appeal transcended class and occupation, creating a shared space where fortune was the only true equalizer. Oversight of poker games ranged from informal agreements to more structured arrangements. In many saloons, the owner or bartender acted as a referee, settling disputes and ensuring that the rules were followed. Urban gambling halls often employed professional dealers and floor managers to maintain order and protect the integrity of the game. In private homes, the responsibility for fair play fell to the host or to the collective sense of honor among the participants. The setting influenced not only the conduct, but also the organization of the game. Saloons and gambling halls often imposed house rules, such as limits on betting or restrictions on the use of wildcards. These rules were posted for all to see or explained at the start of play. In mining camps, the rules might be more fluid, adapting to the preferences of the players at the table. Home games, too, often featured local variations, reflecting the tastes and traditions of the hosts. By the last decades of the 19th century, poker had become a fixture in settled communities. It was a game played not only for money, but also for camaraderie, entertainment, and prestige. The poker table became a place where stories were told, reputations were made, and fortunes could change in the turn of a card. Alongside the formalization of rules and the spread of poker into new venues, another development took shape: the emergence of poker etiquette and behavioral norms. As the game attracted more participants and the stakes grew higher, the need for order and trust became apparent. Standardization was not only a matter of rules, but also of conduct. The late 19th century saw the rise of unwritten codes that governed behavior at the table, helping to maintain a sense of fairness and respect. Etiquette covered a wide range of practices, from the way cards were handled to the proper conduct during betting. Players were expected to refrain from touching the pot, to avoid revealing their cards before the showdown, and to act in turn. These norms helped to prevent disputes and ensure that the game proceeded smoothly. The expectation of polite behavior extended to conversation as well. Excessive boasting, taunting, or attempts to distract opponents were generally frowned upon. Silence or measured speech became marks of a serious player. The communication and enforcement of these norms relied on a mixture of tradition, peer pressure, and occasional intervention by those in authority. In saloons and gambling halls, the dealer or house manager might step in to correct a breach of etiquette. In home games, the group itself enforced standards, often with gentle reminders, or, in extreme cases, by asking a disruptive player to leave. The desire for orderly play was shared by all who valued the integrity of the game. Contemporaneous accounts indicate that etiquette played a crucial role in building trust among players. In an environment where money changed hands quickly and fortunes could be lost in a single hand, the assurance that everyone would abide by the same standards was essential. Disputes, when they arose, were often resolved through appeals to these shared norms. A player accused of acting out of turn or mishandling cards might be admonished by the group or by the dealer, with the understanding that the rules of etiquette were as binding as the formal rules of the game. No single individual or organization can be credited with the creation of poker etiquette. Rather, it developed organically as part of the culture that surrounded the game. The push for standardized rules, however, did attract the attention of researchers and writers. The United States Printing Company and the New York Sun both undertook research aimed at defining definitive poker rules. Their efforts reflected a growing recognition that clarity and consistency were necessary for the game's continued growth. The work of writers, publishers, and dedicated players helped to codify not only the rules of play, but also the expectations for conduct at the table. By the final years of the 19th century, poker etiquette and behavioral norms had become an accepted part of the game. They provided a framework for resolving disputes, maintaining order, and fostering an atmosphere of mutual respect. At the same time, these norms did not eliminate the element of risk or uncertainty that lay at the heart of poker. The game remained a contest of skill, nerve, and chance, shaped as much by the personalities of the players as by the cards in their hands. Through the expansion and standardization of rules, the spread of poker into new venues, and the development of etiquette and behavioral norms, poker emerged from the late 19th century as a game of remarkable depth and enduring appeal. Its transformation in the years after the Civil War laid the foundation for the traditions and practices that continue to define the game to this day. As the cards were shuffled and dealt in saloons, gambling halls, and private homes, a new chapter in the history of poker was written, one hand at a time. As the 20th century began, the landscape for poker in America shifted beneath the feet of its players. The old days of open games in bustling saloons started to fade as lawmakers and civic leaders turned their attention to gambling. In 1909, Nevada, a state known even then for its frontier spirit, passed a law making gambling illegal. This was a clear and deliberate move, backed by the force of state authority. The message was unambiguous. Poker, along with other forms of gambling, was now forbidden in public places. The law did not exist in isolation. Other states watched, and soon followed. Nevada's example, tightening their own restrictions and erecting new legal barriers. The climate for public card play became colder, less tolerant, and increasingly hostile. Within this new legal framework, the consequences for those who tried to keep poker alive in the open became more severe. Enforcement was not always immediate or universal, but the threat was always present. In 1911, California's Attorney General, Ulysses S. Webb, issued a formal opinion on the legality of draw poker. This opinion, sought by those who wanted clarity, was part of a broader pattern. Officials and legal authorities began to take a more active, hands-on role in interpreting and applying gambling laws. The words of the Attorney General carried weight, and they reached the ears of both the public and those who ran card games. The law's reach extended not just through statutes, but through opinions and pronouncements that left little room for ambiguity. For players and operators, the risks of public play became a daily reality. There are records of law enforcement actions, raids, arrests, and the sudden shuttering of once thriving card rooms. These events did not always make the headlines, but their impact was felt acutely by the people involved. The presence of police and city officials became a source of anxiety. There are accounts of city prosecutors in Long Beach declaring dozens of legal and licensed card rooms to be public nuisances. The legal basis for these actions was sometimes debated, but the effect was clear. Card rooms lost their licenses, their doors were closed, and the games moved out of sight. The process by which these laws and opinions were communicated was both formal and informal. Legal notices, city ordinances, and public statements from officials served as the official warning. Word spread quickly through the gambling community. Operators and players learned to read the signs, to sense when a crackdown was coming. In some places, the presence of good government activists, citizens determined to stamp out vice, added to the pressure. The result was a slow but steady erosion of the political and police protection that many card rooms had once enjoyed. In Los Angeles, for example, the efforts of activists like Clifford Clinton contributed to the shutting down of public card rooms, changing the city's gambling culture in fundamental ways. As the legal environment grew harsher, the visibility and accessibility of poker games declined. The familiar sight of poker tables in saloons became rare. Those who still wished to play were forced to adapt. Public venues were no longer safe. The game began to slip into the shadows, finding refuge in places less likely to attract attention. By the early 1930s, poker's presence in the open had diminished. The cards were still shuffled, the chips still stacked, but these rituals now unfolded behind closed doors, away from the gaze of law enforcement and reformers. The retreat from public spaces led poker into a new phase one, defined by secrecy and caution. The underground poker rooms of this era were shaped by necessity and ingenuity. Operators who once ran games in the open learned to adapt their methods. The locations of these games became closely guarded secrets. In some cases, the games moved to private homes or back rooms of businesses. There are records showing that, after losing protection in Los Angeles, card room operators scattered to nearby locations, including Gardena. The decision to leave the city was not taken lightly, but it was a step toward survival. Within these hidden spaces, the physical setup of poker rooms changed. No longer able to advertise their presence with bright lights or prominent signs, organizers chose locations that blended in with their surroundings. Rooms might be tucked away above or behind legitimate businesses. In Gardena, for example, draw poker became the principal game at a site on Vermont Avenue. Here, the card room was flanked by cocktail lounges. These lounges, run by figures such as Shoeshine Nick, served as both a buffer and a cover. Patrons could enter under the pretext of seeking a drink or a shine, their real purpose hidden from casual observers. Security became a primary concern. Invitation-only systems were common, as were the use of lookouts stationed near entrances or windows. These individuals kept watch for unfamiliar faces or signs of a police raid. The need for discretion extended to all aspects of the operation. Communication about game times and locations was handled carefully, often passed by word of mouth among trusted participants. The risk of discovery was ever present, and a single careless word could bring unwanted attention. The social atmosphere within these rooms was shaped by their clandestine nature. There were rituals and unspoken codes of conduct. Players were expected to respect the privacy of others and to avoid drawing attention to the game. The mood was often quieter, more subdued, lacking the loud bravado of the old saloon days. There are accounts from this era that describe the tension and camaraderie that developed among regulars. Trust was essential. New participants were usually introduced by someone already known to the group, and even then they might be subject to quiet observation before being fully accepted. The logistics of running an underground game required careful planning. Tables and chips had to be kept out of sight when not in use. Dealers and staff needed to be both skilled and discreet. Money changed hands quietly and efficiently. The operators who succeeded in this environment were those who could balance the demands of the game with the constant need for secrecy. They built networks of reliable contacts, from backers who provided financial support to employees who could be trusted not to talk. The result was a poker culture that was distinct from its public predecessor. The underground rooms of Gardena and similar places developed their own traditions and social norms. The game itself remained the same, but the environment in which it was played was transformed. Players learned to adapt to the new reality, finding ways to keep the cards moving even as the world outside grew less hospitable. Within this hidden world, the qualities valued among players and operators shifted. Pure skill at the game was no longer enough. Trust, discretion, and reputation became just as important as the ability to read a hand or bluff an opponent. There are records of cardroom owners defending their operations by invoking legal opinions, such as Attorney General Webb's 1911 statement on draw poker. In one notable case, Ernie Prim, a prominent figure in the Gardena poker scene, relied on this opinion during a trial following a raid. The judge agreed with Prim's argument and ordered his poker tables and chips returned. This episode illustrates the delicate balance between law and practice. Legal knowledge became a tool for survival, and the ability to navigate the system was as valuable as any skill at the table. The structure of ownership and investment in these clubs also reflected the need for discretion. Prim, for instance, involved dozens of nearly anonymous point holders as investors in his poker clubs. Each point represented a stake in the business, valued at a substantial sum. This arrangement allowed for a diffusion of risk and a degree of anonymity for those involved. Well-connected backers, who might have ties to legitimate businesses or political figures, saw value in keeping the clubs open. Their investments provided a buffer against sudden losses or legal trouble. Reputation became a form of currency within the underground poker community. Word traveled quickly about those who could be trusted and those who could not. Informal vetting processes developed for new participants. A player's conduct, both at and away from the table, was subject to scrutiny. Breaches of trust or discretion could lead to exclusion from future games. The stakes were high, not just in money, but in social capital. Those who failed to observe the unwritten rules found themselves unwelcome. Behavioral expectations were enforced quietly, but firmly. Loud talk, reckless betting, or any action that might bring attention to the game was discouraged. Participants learned to keep their emotions in check, to maintain a calm and controlled demeanor. There are accounts of the tension that could arise when someone violated these norms, and of the subtle but unmistakable ways in which the group enforced discipline. Success in underground poker required not just a cool head, but a willingness to put the needs of the group above personal ambition. Skill did not disappear as a valued trait, but it was now only part of a larger set of requirements. The balance between playing well and playing safely became a central concern. Some accounts from this era discuss the challenge of maintaining focus on the cards while remaining alert to the possibility of a raid or betrayal. The game demanded both mental agility and social caution. For those who thrived in this environment, the rewards were real, but so were the risks. As poker settled into its underground phase, it did not simply survive, it adapted and evolved. The players and operators who remained learned to value trust, discretion, and reputation as highly as any other asset. The game's spirit endured, even as its outward form was forced to change. In the hush of hidden rooms, under the watchful eyes of trusted friends and wary lookouts, poker found a way to persist. Each hand dealt was an act of quiet defiance, a testament to the resilience of those who refused to let the game die, no matter how strong the forces arrayed against them. The world outside might have grown harsher, but within these secretive spaces, the cards continued to fall, and the game lived on. In the spring of 1931, Nevada underwent a transformation that would reshape the landscape of poker and gambling in the United States. On March 19th, Governor Fred Balzar signed Assembly Bill 98, legalizing unrestricted gambling statewide. This act was not born of mere indulgence. Nevada, then facing economic hardship, sought new sources of revenue and vitality. The law's passage marked a turning point, lifting poker from the shadows of back rooms and riverboats and into the light of public gaming halls. Draw poker, a familiar favorite, was among the legal games now permitted. The prospect of lawful play drew immediate interest. Within days, 21 clubs in Reno alone applied for gaming licenses, eager to take part in a new era of regulated opportunity. These applications signaled a rapid shift. Poker, once a tolerated vice, was now to be conducted openly, subject to the scrutiny and order of legal oversight. Reno's earliest licensed clubs after this legalization included the Owl Club, the Bank Club, the Rex Club, and the Waldorf Club. Each of these establishments became a stage for the evolving public face of poker. Their presence on the city's streets and in its advertisements served as a declaration: poker had returned, and now it wore the mantle of legitimacy. The atmosphere in these clubs was charged with novelty and curiosity. For players, the experience of sitting at a table in a licensed club differed from the old world of furtive gatherings and uncertain outcomes. The rules were declared, the stakes were set, and the presence of official licensing offered a measure of assurance. The wave of legalization did not stop in Reno. On April 2, 1931, the Clark County Commission granted licenses to 8 Las Vegas businesses. Among these were the Northern Club, the Las Vegas Club, the Boulder Club, the Red Rooster Nightclub, the Big Four Club, the Exchange Club, the Rainbow Club, and the Meadows Casino. The Northern Club, owned by the Stocker family, was one of the first to secure a gambling license in Las Vegas. The Boulder Club also received one of the earliest permits. These venues quickly became gathering places for residents and travelers alike, offering legal poker as part of their gaming repertoire. The presence of legal poker rooms in both Reno and Las Vegas marked a dramatic shift. Poker was no longer hidden or whispered about. It was now advertised, regulated, and accessible to anyone of age, willing to take a seat. The transition from underground games to casino play was met with a mixture of relief and skepticism. For seasoned players, the promise of fair play and the absence of immediate danger were welcome changes. The clubs brought together individuals from various walks of life. Miners, ranchers, tourists, and locals all found common ground at the poker table. Some contemporaneous accounts describe the initial public response as one of fascination. People gathered to watch, to learn, and to participate in a game that had previously belonged to a separate, riskier world. Staff and players alike were adjusting to the new rhythms of regulated play. The presence of licensing authorities and the knowledge that games were being conducted under the watchful eye of the state lent a sense of security. This environment fostered an openness that had been impossible in earlier decades. As the years passed, the system of licensing and oversight continued to evolve. William Harrah began his bingo ventures in downtown Reno in 1937, 6 years after the legalization of gambling. His entry into the gaming industry reflected the growing legitimacy and business potential of regulated gambling in Nevada. By the early 1950s, the pace of development remained steady. On August 6, 1952, Bill Fong received a Nevada Tax Commission gambling license for the new China Club in Reno. The granting of these licenses was more than a bureaucratic act. It was an affirmation that poker had secured its place within the fabric of Nevada's public life. By the end of this period, poker had re-emerged in public, regulated spaces within Nevada casinos, no longer relegated to the shadows, but now presentable and accessible. As poker settled into its new home within Nevada's casinos, the environment continued to change. The early years of legal gaming were marked by a sense of freedom, but also by the recognition of risk. Casino owners and regulators understood that the legitimacy of the industry depended on their ability to maintain order and trust. The state took deliberate steps to assert control over the gaming environment. In 1955, Nevada passed legislation creating the Gaming Control Division under the Nevada Tax Commission. This body was tasked with licensing casino owners, making it clear that gaming was a revocable privilege, not an unchecked right. The introduction of formal oversight marked a significant development. The state was no longer content to simply issue licenses. It now sought to monitor and manage the conduct of those involved in the industry. The process of oversight deepened in 1959 with the creation of the State Gaming Commission, which operated independently of the Tax Commission. This commission was charged with establishing and administering gaming regulations. Together with the State Gaming Control Board, it developed rigorous application and investigation processes to screen casino owners and operators. These mechanisms were designed to promote transparency, discourage criminal influence, and ensure that the industry operated within clear boundaries. The presence of these regulatory bodies was felt throughout the casino environment. Their work extended beyond licensing. They set standards for conduct, resolved disputes, and intervened when rules were violated. Within the casinos themselves, the atmosphere reflected this growing emphasis on control. House rules became standardized. Procedures for handling bets, shuffling cards, and resolving disagreements were codified. The adoption of consistent rules reduced ambiguity and provided a framework for fair play. In this environment, specific roles emerged to enforce order. Pit bosses and floor managers became familiar figures in poker rooms. Their responsibilities included monitoring games, settling disputes, and ensuring that play proceeded according to established protocols. These staff members served as intermediaries between players and the house, embodying the casino's commitment to oversight and integrity. The introduction of surveillance and staff oversight produced noticeable effects on player behavior. With the knowledge that games were being watched and that disputes would be addressed promptly, many players adjusted their conduct. The threat of violence or cheating, once an ever-present risk in underground games, was sharply reduced. Players focused on the game itself, confident that the rules would be enforced. This environment fostered a sense of security and predictability. Some contemporaneous accounts from casino staff and players describe an increased sense of professionalism. The game was no longer a free-for-all. Instead, it was a structured contest of skill and chance, conducted within clear boundaries. The process of regulation did not end with oversight of owners and staff. As the industry grew, the state continued to refine its approach. In 1967 and 1969, Nevada passed corporate gaming acts, allowing public corporations to own casinos and increasing the availability of public information on operations. A bill passed in 1967 permitted public companies to own gaming facilities without requiring each shareholder to be licensed. This measure was modified by the legislature in 1969, further clarifying the rules for corporate ownership. These changes expanded the pool of potential investors and operators, fostering growth while maintaining a commitment to transparency. By the end of this period, casino poker rooms were characterized by structured oversight and formalized rules. The days of informal, loosely governed games had given way to an environment where every aspect of play was subject to regulation and observation. This transformation was not merely administrative. It shaped the experience of poker itself, influencing everything from the conduct of players to the reputation of the game in the wider world. Yet even as oversight increased, the essence of poker remained rooted in uncertainty. Regulation could reduce the threat of violence and cheating, but it could not eliminate chance. By 1960, Nevada's total gross gaming revenue had reached more than $200 million annually, a testament to the popularity and vitality of the industry. The state's population exceeded 280,000 people, many of whom were drawn to the excitement and possibility offered by casino gaming. The opening of new venues, such as Caesar's Palace and the original Aladdin on the Las Vegas Strip in 1966, reflected the ongoing expansion of the industry. Circus Casino opened in 1968, followed by the International on Paradise Road in 1969, which became the world's first mega-resort. These developments brought new players and new energy to the game. The impact of regulation was most evident in the reduction of overt risks. Incidents of violence, cheating, or disruption became less common in the regulated environment of the casino poker room. The presence of surveillance, formal procedures, and staff oversight created a setting where fairness and security were prioritized. Regulatory bodies and casino policies addressed these issues directly, establishing mechanisms for investigation and enforcement. While there were instances where regulation was challenged, or where rules were tested, the overall effect was a dramatic reduction in the dangers that had once defined the game. Players adapted to this new balance between risk and safety. The allure of poker remained, rooted in the interplay of skill, strategy, and chance. Regulation could shape the environment, but it could not alter the fundamental uncertainty at the heart of the game. Some players welcomed the new order, appreciating the predictability and fairness it brought. Others missed the raw intensity of earlier days, feeling that something essential had been lost. Yet for most, the transition meant a safer, more accessible game, open to a wider audience, and conducted under the watchful eye of the state. Contemporaneous accounts from this period reflect a recognition of the persistence of uncertainty and chance in regulated poker. The cards were still shuffled, the bets still placed, and the outcome still unknown until the final hand was revealed. The presence of rules and oversight did not diminish the excitement of the game. Instead, it allowed players to focus on the contest itself, free from the fear of foul play or sudden danger. The balance between order and uncertainty became a defining characteristic of the casino poker room. By the close of the 1960s, poker had completed its transformation from a tolerated vice into a managed institution. Regulation had preserved the essential qualities of the game, while reducing its most overt dangers. Poker was now presentable, conducted in public spaces, and accessible to anyone willing to take a seat at the table. The journey from shadowy back rooms to the bright lights of Nevada's casinos was complete. Within these walls the game continued, shaped by the interplay of chance, skill, and the steady hand of oversight. The story of poker in this era is one of adaptation and resilience, a testament to the enduring appeal of the game and the power of regulation to shape its destiny. In the soft electric glow of Las Vegas, in the spring of 1970, a quiet transformation began inside Binion's Horseshoe Casino. Benny Binion, the owner of the Horseshoe, gathered 7 men at his tables for an event that would change the public face of poker. The room itself was thick with the scent of cigarettes and the low murmur of conversation. There was no grand stage, no roaring crowd, Only the shuffle of cards and the measured tones of the players seated around the felt. Among them sat Johnny Moss, Amarillo Slim Preston, Sailor Roberts, Doyle Brunson, Puggy Pearson, Crandell Addington, and Carl Cannon. Each man brought with him a reputation forged in the private smoky rooms of the poker world, but here, for the first time, their skill would be tested in a contest designed to crown a champion. The structure of this first World Series of Poker was simple, yet it carried an air of gravity. Rather than a single game, the players competed in a series of cash games, rotating through 5-card stud, deuce to 7 low-ball draw, Raz, 7-card stud, and Texas Hold'em. There were no television cameras, no audience beyond the curious regulars of the horseshoe. The atmosphere was both competitive and collegial, as each player recognized the significance of what was unfolding. At the end, there was no trophy, no pile of cash to be won outright. Instead, the participants voted on who among them deserved the title of champion. Johnny Moss, respected for his calm and his insight, was chosen by his peers and awarded a silver cup. The gesture was modest, but it marked the beginning of something larger than any one player. The following year, Binion refined the format. In 1971, the World Series of Poker main event became a winner-take-all contest, with 6 players each buying in for $5,000. The sense of ceremony grew, and the stakes rose alongside it. Moss again emerged victorious, this time rewarded with a cash prize of $30,000. The event was still intimate, but the contours of a true tournament were taking shape. The room was filled with the quiet tension of high stakes, the players' faces set in lines of concentration as chips changed hands and the hours passed. By 1972, the main event introduced a freeze-out tournament with a $10,000 buy-in, a format that would become synonymous with the World Series of Poker for decades. 8 players took their seats that year, each knowing that only one would leave with the title. Amarillo Slim Preston, known for his wit and his flair for publicity, claimed the victory and the $80,000 prize. His win attracted attention beyond the insular world of poker, as his colorful personality drew reporters and curious spectators to the horseshoe. The event's visibility began to grow, and with it, poker's reputation as a game of skill and nerve. The World Series of Poker main event remained winner-take-all until 1978, with the prize and the glory reserved for a single victor. Each year, the roster of players grew more varied, the atmosphere charged with both rivalry and respect. In 1979, Hal Fowler, an amateur rather than a professional, won the main event, signaling that poker's appeal had broadened. The tournament had become a gathering point for hopefuls and veterans alike, its structure a balance of tradition and innovation. Through these formative years, the World Series of Poker established itself as the centerpiece of competitive poker, drawing the attention of players and spectators from around the country. Television's gaze first settled on the World Series of Poker in 1973, when CBS Sports brought its cameras into Binion's horseshoe. The decision to televise the event followed closely on the heels of Amarillo Slim Preston's 1972 victory, a win that had attracted significant media attention. The presence of cameras in the casino changed the atmosphere in subtle ways. The lights were brighter, the spaces between tables more carefully arranged. The focus of the broadcast was not on the rapid exchange of cards, but on the faces of the players, the pauses in conversation, the slight movements of hands and eyes that revealed as much as any spoken word. Televised poker brought a new dimension to the game, one that emphasized psychological performance as much as technical skill. Producers lingered on the tense silences between bets, the nervous tapping of chips, the way a player's expression might flicker before a crucial decision. Viewers at home could not see the players' cards, but they could study the lines of concentration on Johnny Moss's face, the easy smile of Amarillo Slim, the measured calm of Doyle Brunson. These moments, magnified by the camera, invited audiences to share in the suspense and to imagine themselves in the players' seats. The effect of television coverage was felt both inside and outside the casino. For the first time, spectators who had never set foot in a poker room could witness the drama and discipline required at the highest levels of the game. Reviews and commentary from the period noted how the broadcasts transformed poker from a private contest to a public spectacle. The focus on players' expressions and restraint gave the game a new dignity, challenging stereotypes of poker as a game of luck or deception. Instead, viewers saw patience, calculation, and emotional control on display. The World Series of Poker continued to expand its reach through the late 1970s. In 1977, the tournament introduced the Ladies' Championship, a $100 buy-in stud poker event. Jackie McDaniels won the inaugural Ladies' Championship, earning $5,580 and a place in the tournament's growing history. The main event itself drew more participants each year, reflecting the growing popularity of the game. In 1979, the main event attracted 54 entrants, a marked increase from the single table of the early years. The field was diverse, the stakes higher, but the focus remained on the player's composure and skill under pressure. Certain tournaments and champions became touchstones for both players and viewers. Doyle Brunson's back-to-back victories in 1976 and 1977, and Bobby Baldwin's win in 1978, were broadcast to a wider audience, their strategies and demeanor analyzed by commentators and fans. The broadcasts often highlighted the psychological dimensions of the game, framing poker as a contest not just of cards but of will and discipline. The presence of television, rather than diminishing the game's complexity, brought its subtleties into sharper relief. Producers and commentators played a quiet but significant role in shaping the public's perception of poker. Their choices about what to show and how to narrate the action emphasized the tension and the humanity of the players. The camera's slow pan across the table, the careful attention to a player's hesitation before making a call, all served to draw viewers into the moment. These production choices helped define televised poker's distinctive style, one that valued introspection and restraint as much as the final reveal of the winning hand. Through the 1980s and 1990s, the World Series of Poker remained the focal point of televised poker. Each year, the main event brought together a mix of seasoned professionals and determined amateurs, all seeking the title and the prize. The number of participants grew steadily, and the broadcasts kept pace, offering viewers a window into the evolving world of high-stakes competition. The spectacle of poker had become a fixture in the public imagination, but the heart of the game remained unchanged. Despite the increasing visibility and the pressures of public scrutiny, the core demands of poker endured. The main event's format, established in 1972 as a $10,000 buy-in no-limit Texas Hold'em freeze-out, persisted through the end of the century. The structure of the tournament changed only gradually. In 1978, the prize pool began to be distributed among the top finishers, rather than reserved solely for the winner. Yet the essential requirements for success at the table remained constant. Players who excelled during this era often spoke about the mental discipline required to compete. Johnny Moss, who won the main event in 1970 and 1971, was known for his steadiness under pressure. Doyle Brunson, whose victories in 1976 and 1977 were watched by thousands, exemplified the patience and composure that defined the best players. They made decisions with care, weighing each possibility, never allowing emotion or the glare of the cameras to dictate their actions. Strategies and behaviors that had characterized poker in private rooms continued to be effective in the public eye. The ability to read opponents, to wait for the right moment, to manage one's own reactions, all remains central to success. The broadcasts might have magnified these qualities, but they did not alter their importance. Observers noted that even as the tournament grew in size and spectacle, the best players remained those who could maintain their focus and make rational choices under pressure. Contemporaneous accounts from players and commentators often return to the theme of emotional control. The pressure of competing for large sums of money, in front of cameras and spectators, could be intense. Yet the champions of the World Series of Poker were those who found a way to remain calm, to think clearly, and to act decisively. Their success depended less on luck than on their ability to manage uncertainty and to trust their judgment. The presence of television and the growth of the World Series of Poker brought new challenges, but they did not change the nature of the game itself. The decision-making process at the table remained a private contest, even when broadcast to millions. The players' thoughts and calculations were invisible to the audience, revealed only in the outcome of each hand. The public gaze might have heightened the drama, but it did not touch the inner world of the player, where composure and calculation reigned. Some individuals became symbols of this continuity. Doyle Brunson, for example, was often cited as an example of the timeless qualities required for success. His approach to the game, marked by patience and adaptability, remained unchanged despite the shifting landscape around him. Other champions, such as Johnny Moss and Amarillo Slim Preston, also embodied the enduring demands of poker. Their victories were celebrated not just for their drama, but for the discipline that made them possible. As the 1990s drew to a close, the World Series of Poker had become an institution. The main event in 1999, won by Noel Furlong with pocket fives against a field of 393 players, offered a prize of $1,000. The scale of the tournament had grown, but the essence of the contest remained. The rules were clear, the pressure immense, and the demands on the players unchanged. Each hand was a new test of patience, judgment, and nerve. Through 3 decades of change, the public face of poker was transformed, but its heart was steady. The World Series of Poker brought the game into the light, inviting new players and new audiences to witness its challenges and rewards. Televised coverage revealed the subtle drama of decision-making and restraint, making heroes of those who could endure the pressure. Yet beneath the spectacle, the core demands of poker endured, unaltered by time or attention. In the hush before a crucial bet, in the steady gaze of a champion, the essence of the game remained as it had always been, a quiet contest of skill, patience, and resolve. At the turn of the millennium, a quiet but profound transformation began to take hold in the world of poker. The foundation for this transformation was laid in January 1998, when Planet Poker dealt the first real money hand of poker over the internet. What had once been a game confined to smoky backrooms, casino tables, and private gatherings, now found a new digital home. By late 1999, Planet Poker had attracted the attention of Mike Caro, a well-known poker writer, who became the public face of the company. His presence lent credibility and visibility to the idea that poker could not only exist but thrive in a virtual environment. The early days of online poker were marked by rapid expansion and experimentation. As broadband internet access spread throughout the 2000s, more people found themselves able to access these virtual card rooms from the comfort of their homes. The software that powered these games became more sophisticated, offering smoother gameplay, better graphics, and features designed to replicate the social and strategic dimensions of live poker. This technological progress made online poker more attractive, not just to seasoned players, but also to those who had never before considered sitting down at a traditional table. The growth of online poker during this decade was dramatic and quantifiable. In 2001, global revenues from online poker stood at $82.7 million. By 2005, that number had soared to $2.4 billion, as reported by Christensen Capital Advisors. The scale of participation expanded accordingly. New operators entered the market, each competing for players' attention with creative marketing campaigns and promotional offers. These efforts brought online poker to the forefront of public consciousness and made it a familiar pastime for people around the world. Party gaming, the parent company of Party Poker, emerged as a dominant force in this new landscape. In June 2005, Party Gaming executed an initial public offering on the London Stock Exchange. The company's market value exceeded $8 billion at the time of the IPO, a figure that reflected both investor confidence and the size of the player base. Remarkably, 92% of Party Gaming's income at this time came from its poker operations. The success of Party Gaming underscored the central role poker had come to play within the broader world of online gaming. By February 2010, the ecosystem of online poker had grown complex and interconnected. Approximately 545 online poker websites were active, each offering its own approach to the game. The structure of the industry had also evolved. While around 40 sites operated as standalone entities in March 2008, by February 2010 only about 24 remained independent. The rest had joined larger networks, operating as skins that shared player pools and resources across 21 different networks. Eiffel Tower stood as the largest of these networks by number of skins, offering players a vast array of options and experiences. Among individual sites, PokerStars.com distinguished itself as the largest by number of players present at any given time. The sheer volume of games, tournaments, and financial transactions taking place on these platforms far surpassed anything that had been imagined in earlier eras. The accessibility and scale of online poker created a new reality for the game, one in which anyone with an internet connection could participate, regardless of geography or social standing. The expansion of online poker did not go unnoticed by regulators and legal authorities. The decade saw ongoing attention to the legal status of online gambling, with various jurisdictions grappling with questions of oversight, taxation, and consumer protection. These regulatory responses reflected both the novelty and the scale of the online poker phenomenon, as governments and industry stakeholders sought to adapt to a rapidly changing environment. As the decade progressed, online poker became a major, rapidly expanding arena for the game, drawing in millions of players and reshaping the way poker was played and understood. The digital nature of online poker introduced new dynamics that would fundamentally alter player behavior and decision-making. One of the most significant changes was the anonymity afforded by the virtual environment. In a traditional poker room, players rely on physical cues, facial expressions, and table talk to inform their decisions. Online, these elements were stripped away. Players interacted through screen names, avatars, and chat windows, creating a layer of distance and abstraction between competitors. This anonymity had far-reaching implications for the psychology of the game. Without the pressure of face-to-face confrontation, many players reported feeling freer to experiment with new strategies and to play more aggressively than they might have in person. The absence of social scrutiny made it easier for some to bluff or take risks, while others found themselves less intimidated by experienced opponents. The anonymity also meant that reputations could be built or lost entirely within the confines of the online world, unmoored from the traditional hierarchies of live poker. The pace of play increased dramatically. Online platforms allowed for hands to be dealt and completed much faster than in live settings, where shuffling, dealing, and conversation could slow the action. Players quickly adapted to this new tempo, learning to make decisions in seconds rather than minutes. The ability to play multiple tables simultaneously, a practice known as multi-tabling, became a defining feature of the online experience. Skilled players could participate in several games at once, dramatically increasing the number of hands they played and potentially their earnings. The high volume of play brought new forms of error and learning. With so many hands dealt in a short period, players were exposed to a wider range of situations and outcomes. Mistakes could be made and corrected quickly, allowing for rapid improvement among those willing to study their results and adapt their strategies. The relentless pace also introduced new pressures, as the risk of fatigue and distraction grew with the number of tables in play. Contemporaneous commentary from players and observers highlighted these changes. Many noted that the psychological experience of online poker was distinct from that of live play. The lack of physical presence made it easier for some to detach emotionally from their results, reducing the sting of losses and, in some cases, the thrill of victory. Others observed that the online environment fostered a more analytical approach to the game, as players relied increasingly on logic and probability rather than intuition or social cues. New strategies and adaptations emerged in response to the unique conditions of online play. Some players specialized in exploiting the tendencies of anonymous opponents, developing techniques for tracking betting patterns and identifying weaknesses. The ability to gather and analyze large amounts of data on one's opponents became a valuable skill, as did the capacity to manage the mental demands of high-volume play. The online environment rewarded those who could combine speed, discipline, and adaptability, reshaping the profile of the successful poker player. By the end of the decade, the dynamics of poker decision-making had been fundamentally altered by the scale and anonymity of online play. The game had become faster, more data-driven, and less reliant on the traditional markers of live competition. As the online poker landscape matured, the role of mathematics and data analysis became increasingly central to competitive success. The vast number of hands played and the availability of detailed hand histories created an environment uniquely suited to quantitative analysis. Players began to apply probability theory and statistical reasoning to their decisions, moving beyond intuition and experience to embrace a more scientific approach. The use of mathematical tools was not limited to theoretical study. Software resources emerged to assist players in tracking their results, analyzing their play, and identifying areas for improvement. These tools allowed players to review their hands, calculate probabilities, and compare their decisions to optimal strategies. The ability to collect and analyze large datasets gave serious competitors a new edge, enabling them to refine their tactics and exploit patterns in both their own play and that of their opponents. Free-roll tournaments, in which players could compete for real prizes without risking their own money, illustrated the sophistication with which online poker sites approached player psychology and retention. These tournaments were not simply giveaways, they were carefully designed marketing investments. A small percentage of free-roll participants would eventually become profitable customers, generating long-term value for the sites. The structure of free-roll prize pools evolved over time, reflecting a deepening understanding of how to maximize participation and conversion rates, while maintaining player interest and satisfaction. Contemporaneous writings and tutorials began to emphasize the importance of mathematics in poker success. Players and analysts published articles and guides explaining concepts such as expected value, pot odds, and variance. These resources helped to demystify the mathematical underpinnings of the game, making them accessible to a broader audience. The growing body of educational material reflected the increasing sophistication of the online poker community as players sought to gain every possible advantage in a highly competitive environment. The use of data extended beyond individual improvement. Organized groups and communities formed to share insights, discuss strategies, and analyze trends. The collective knowledge generated by these networks contributed to a culture of continuous learning and innovation. Players who mastered the use of probability, statistics, and database analysis found themselves better equipped to navigate the complexities of online poker, turning information into a powerful weapon at the virtual table. By the end of the 2000s, mathematical analysis and data-driven decision-making had become central to competitive online poker. The game had evolved from a test of nerve and intuition into a discipline that rewarded careful study, rigorous analysis, and a deep understanding of probability. Across the decade from 2000 to 2010, poker underwent a transformation shaped by technology, scale, and the relentless pursuit of advantage. The rise of online platforms opened the game to millions, creating new opportunities and challenges for players and operators alike. The anonymity and high volume of online play reshaped the psychological and strategic dimensions of the game, demanding new skills and approaches. The embrace of mathematics and data analysis marked a further evolution, as players harnessed the power of information to improve their results. In this new world, poker became not just a game of chance and skill, but a domain where technology, psychology, and mathematics converged, forever altering the way the game was played and understood. Since 2011, the world of professional poker has undergone a quiet but profound transformation. The game, once dominated by intuition and private study, now stands at the intersection of technology and human judgment. This new era is shaped by the widespread adoption of solvers, powerful databases, and artificial intelligence tools. These innovations have altered how players prepare, analyze, and ultimately approach the game. The pace of technological change has been swift, but beneath the surface, poker remains a contest of risk and uncertainty, demanding not only knowledge, but the ability to navigate the unpredictable. The introduction of advanced study tools has been a defining feature of this period. In late 2020, GTO Wizard entered the scene as a cloud-based poker solver, dramatically lowering the barriers to high-level analysis. By hosting over 10 million pre-solved scenarios on remote servers, GTO Wizard made it possible for players to access instant calculations from pre-flop to river, without the need for powerful local hardware. For the first time, players could study complex game theory solutions from any computer or smartphone with a web browser. This ease of access marked a significant departure from earlier eras, when solver use required technical expertise and expensive equipment. While GTO Wizard provided convenience, dedicated local solvers like PO Solver continued to hold a special place in the arsenal of serious professionals. PO Solver, known for its precision and flexibility, required substantial setup and a steep learning curve. However, these challenges were often outweighed by the control it offered. Players with technical backgrounds could input custom situations, manipulate bet sizing, and analyze nuanced spots that fell outside the scope of pre-solved libraries. The investment in time and hardware was considerable, with many projects demanding at least 32 gigabytes of RAM for large no-limit hold'em analyses. Yet for those willing to master its intricacies, PO Solver became an indispensable tool for understanding the game's most complex situations. Monka Solver emerged as the solver of choice for pot-limit Omaha specialists. Its cross-platform Java architecture enabled detailed modeling of multi-way cash game scenarios and supported sophisticated abstractions for equity calculations. Running large pre-flop solves in PLO was a technical feat, often requiring 64 gigabytes or more of memory. Many dedicated users set up overnight calculations to build personal databases for future study. Monka Solver's free version, though limited to turn and river solves, allowed new users to explore its capabilities before investing in the full license. This approach fostered a culture of experimentation and incremental learning, as players gradually expanded their analytical toolkit. Other software platforms expanded the reach of solver technology into new areas of the game. Poker's Nowi, released in 2014, blended game theory optimal analysis with artificial intelligence. The software provided immediate feedback on player mistakes, acting as a personal advisor during practice sessions. By importing hand histories from both US and offshore sites, Poker Snowy offered personalized analysis, identifying where players deviated from optimal lines. This real-time assessment shifted the focus from general principles to specific, actionable adjustments, accelerating the learning process for many aspiring professionals. GTO Plus carved out a niche among players who valued custom decision trees and fine-grained control. Its strength in heads-up analysis made it a favorite for those seeking to master one-on-one situations. Hold'em Resources Calculator, initially focused on tournament play and ICM analysis, evolved to address post-flop scenarios, reflecting the growing sophistication of tournament strategy. PLO Genius, a cloud-based tool for pot limit Omaha, offered GTO simulations tailored to a range of stack sizes and rake structures, enabling players to study both pre-flop and post-flop scenarios with unprecedented precision. The shift to cloud-based solvers like GTO Wizard and Deep Solver further democratized access to high-level study. Players no longer needed to invest in expensive hardware or navigate complex software installations. With a few clicks, they could review optimal strategies for a variety of formats, from cash games to multi-table tournaments. At the same time, local calculator solvers such as PO Solver, GTO Plus and Monka Solver remained essential for those who required custom analyses and were willing to invest in the necessary resources. The impact of these tools on study habits was immediate and far-reaching. Preparation routines changed as players incorporated solver outputs into their daily practice. Instead of relying solely on experience or anecdote, they could now test ideas against mathematically sound solutions. The ability to review thousands of scenarios in a short period accelerated the pace of improvement and raised the baseline of strategic understanding across the professional community. As solvers and AI-assisted tools became central to poker study, the game's culture began to shift. The solitary pursuit of mastery gave way to more organized, collaborative forms of learning. Professional training groups and study collectives emerged, providing structured environments for sharing knowledge and refining strategy. These communities, sometimes formalized as coaching stables or online forums, allowed players to pool resources and expertise. The collective review of hand histories and solver outputs became a cornerstone of preparation, fostering a sense of shared purpose among members. Leo Margetts, a prominent professional, publicly described solver-driven preparation as a secret weapon for major tournament series. Her acknowledgement reflected a broader trend. The best players were no longer defined solely by natural talent or intuition, but by their willingness to engage deeply with the latest analytical tools. Modern training apps integrated solvers directly into their suites, allowing users to practice entire tournament trees and observe how solver-approved lines evolved across multiple streets. This dynamic approach replaced static strategy charts with interactive drills, simulating the pressure of live play through time-limited decisions and instant feedback. Professional study platforms now emphasized solver integration and community forums as essential features. Players could participate in GTO drills designed to identify and correct leaks in their game, often competing against each other in real time. These platforms offered multi-table support, customization settings, and secure payment systems, reflecting their role as long-term partners in skill development. The emergence of regulated real-time assistance software further blurred the line between preparation and play, providing tools for professional study that were distinct from unregulated backdoor versions. The institutionalization of poker study raised professional standards and influenced the competitive dynamics of the game. Shared knowledge became a powerful force, as collective learning allowed groups to adapt more quickly to evolving strategies. The best-performing stables and training groups set the pace for innovation, with their members often dominating high-stakes tournaments and cash games. At the same time, the increased structure and formality of study routines encouraged a culture of transparency and mutual improvement. Players openly discussed their use of solvers, debated the merits of different tools, and collaborated on large-scale analysis projects. The game's intellectual landscape became more interconnected, as ideas and insights flowed freely within and between study communities. This new environment was not without its challenges. The rapid dissemination of knowledge sometimes led to controversy, as debates arose over the boundaries of fair play and the ethics of information sharing. The distinction between preparation and real-time assistance became a topic of ongoing discussion, with players and platforms navigating the evolving regulatory landscape. Despite these tensions, the overall trend was clear. Professional poker had become increasingly structured around collective learning and institutionalized preparation. Yet, for all the advances in technology and organization, the heart of poker remained unchanged. The game continued to be defined by uncertainty and the necessity of human judgment. Even the most powerful solvers could only calculate optimal strategies for specific situations. In live play, players faced a constantly shifting landscape of incomplete information, unpredictable opponents, and fleeting opportunities. The presence of advanced study tools did not eliminate the need for decision-making under pressure. Poker's Noe illustrated this reality by providing immediate feedback when players practiced against its AI. Mistakes were revealed in real time, but correcting them required more than technical knowledge. Addressing weaknesses such as excessive blind losses or handover valuation demanded ongoing practice and the willingness to adapt. The best players used hand history analysis tools to identify specific leaks in their game, but applying those lessons in the heat of competition remained a deeply human challenge. The limitations of technology were evident in the unpredictability of high-level play. No matter how thoroughly a player prepared, unexpected outcomes and misreads continued to occur. Solvers offered guidance, but they could not account for every variable present in a live tournament or cash game. The interplay of risk, intuition, and psychological pressure ensured that uncertainty remained central to the game. Analysts and players alike recognized that while technology could illuminate the path, it was up to individuals to walk it. Discussions about the solvability of poker became common within the professional community. Some argued that the widespread availability of solver outputs would eventually standardize play, reducing the element of surprise. Others pointed to the enduring complexity of human behavior and the impossibility of capturing every nuance in a mathematical model. The debate underscored a fundamental truth. Poker, at its core, is not merely a puzzle to be solved, but a proving ground for navigating risk under uncertainty. Players and analysts reflected on the relationship between technology and risk with a sense of humility. They acknowledged the power of modern tools, but also emphasized the importance of adaptability and self-awareness. The best preparation could not guarantee success, nor could it eliminate the role of chance. Poker remained a game where knowledge and courage were tested in equal measure, and where every decision carried the weight of the unknown. As the landscape of poker study continued to evolve, the game itself retained its essential character, The widespread use of solvers, databases, and artificial intelligence had raised the level of competition and deepened the collective understanding of strategy. Training groups and study communities provided new avenues for growth, fostering a culture of collaboration and continuous improvement. Yet beneath the surface of calculation and analysis, the spirit of poker endured, a contest shaped by risk, uncertainty, and the irreducible complexity of human decision-making. In this era, preparation and analysis have become paramount. Players dedicate countless hours to mastering the tools of the trade, building databases, and refining their strategies with the help of cutting-edge software. They collaborate, share insights, and push the boundaries of what is possible. But when the cards are dealt and the chips are in play, the outcome is never certain. The game demands not only knowledge, but the courage to act in the face of uncertainty. Through all the changes of the past decade, poker remains what it has always been, a proving ground for the mind, a test of nerve, and a reminder that, even in an age of unparalleled information, the future can never be fully known. The tools may have changed, but the challenge endures.